So Games Workshop's new Balance Dataslate has certainly reined in the Drukhari somewhat, but it's certainly not all bad news. Let's take a look at some of the units that got much better. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're talking Drukhari and focus on what new units might be coming to the fore for one of the strongest armies in Warhammer 40k. Since their codex is released, it did seem that them and Admech were running roughshod over quite a lot of the other armies, though other decent books have come out since, maybe Grey Knights and Orcs in particular. I'd say that the Balance Dataslate has largely been a nerf to Drukhari as a whole and will hold them back at the top tier of competitive play, but also might be a good thing for the army's internal balance. A lot of units that were basically auto picks are now a bit less so, and a lot of the units that weren't really seeing play now have got really quite interesting. I thought in this video we'd quickly go over the nerfs, then go through the units that were buffed in a bit more detail. But first up, the nerfs then. Now the dust has settled a bit, I think some of these range from things that are genuinely going to be things that turn you off taking certain units, and perhaps some of them are just reining in the power slightly on units that are still going to be good anyway. I think for the amount of power that the Archon brings, up 5 points to 70 points really isn't all that big a deal. He's got good buffs, he's got decent fighting ability with the Gym Blade, and he's got great Warlord traits to either reroll all combat attacks or make your opponent fight last. Still definitely worth an include. The Succubus got the biggest nerf out of the whole lot, going up to 80 points, a massive plus 20. Again, I still think that she's going to be worth playing, but basically it seems like she's costed with her very best relics and war gear in mind. She's looking a bit overcosted now if you don't run her with the optimum gear. Either something like Dark Lotus Toxin, Ravagers of Flails in Court of Strife, or the Triptych Whip and Precision Blows combo. Might be a case of just taking one Succubus as opposed to two. Witches going up to 12 points does feel quite painful, and I do think that Drukhari players might reconsider these now, and potentially look at other things like Racks or Cabalites to fill out their Raiders, as now you really are paying for the amount of volume attacks that they can throw out. They kind of feel like a unit that you're going to have to be even more careful than previously with, as losing 12-point toughness 3 models with bad saves is usually going to feel pretty bad if you're just exposed to a little bit of bolter fire. Incubi going up 2 points to 18 points each still seems reasonable to me. They still have great damage output, and it gets absolutely monstrous when Drazar gets involved, and they do have their nice Tormentor special rule to make the enemy fight last if they fail a leadership test, which you could maybe manipulate with things like Grizzly Trophies. I still think they're going to be good. A few units are still going to be able to trade up and kill something more expensive than they are. Finally, for actual unit nerfs, the Kronos goes up 5 points to 75. Not the biggest tweak, but certainly does punish the playstyle of running something like 9 of them in Dark Technomancers, with those particularly vicious auto-hit attacks. Then for upgrades, Trueborn and Bloodbrides both went up 1 point. Trueborn now feel a bit more balanced against just regular Cabalites firing weapons without the upgrade, perhaps feeling a bit more take or leave, and maybe in stiff competition with the Ravager now. Bloodbrides have a massive points increase, plus 1 point on their upgrade, and plus 3 on the Witches, sending them all the way up to 15 points per model. They're still a nice enough general purpose combat unit, but I can't help but think with that much of a price increase they're quite likely to get overshone by other things. I mean, for just 2 points more than that you can get Hellions, with better toughness, faster movement and damage to weapons. Finally, and one of the bigger nerfs to the faction as a whole, the Dark Lancers on Raiders cost 10 points now, where they were previously free, and that now makes the cheapest Raider that you can field a Disintegrator Cannon Raider. That would cost you 100 points, with the extra 5 points to upgrade to a Dark Lance if you want to. I feel that Raiders now, perhaps the default loadout might be the Disintegrator Cannon, though I guess with Blackheart rerolls the Dark Lance is still a pretty efficient choice, as it's very likely to hit. I think Drukhari still are certainly going to want their transports to deliver all of their fragile but very hard-hitting units, so I do think that this will be a nerf to the faction as a whole, and I think maybe Raiders are going to be a bit more balanced versus Venoms now, with it being pretty even as to whether you go the one way or the other, rather than Raiders just being the default better choice. Overall, I'd say that Games Workshop has generally done a good job of just looking at the Drukhari units that are doing the best, making them cost a little bit more, and perhaps bringing the faction back more in line with a lot of the other 9th edition codexes. Perhaps the standard meta Drukhari list might cost an extra 100 points or so compared with what it did previous. It's really not all bad news though, as plenty of units went down, potentially opening up some other interesting options and builds, and just generally making the codex a bit more internally balanced than it was before. First up, 3 of the Homunculus Coven units went down significantly. The Homunculus has dropped down to 70 points, down from 80, and I kind of feel that's a bit more representative of him, compared with the other 2 HQs that you can turn into melee monsters with just a relic and warlord trait. The homunculus isn't so much of a direct damage dealer, and is normally just going to be there for his buffs. Going down to 70 points means that he might actually be included in the homunculus patrol that a lot of Drukhari players run. Often Drazar was the choice that was taking his spot. The buffs that they give are +1 toughness and healing units. That's a lot more relevant now both Grotesques and Talos have also dropped, and he could certainly be interesting just as a support piece for those units. Otherwise though, he does have a few other fun tricks. 2 CP for the Crucible of Malediction could be really quite potent against Psyker armies. That's the one where you might be able to fire a whole bunch of mortal wounds around if you can get multiple Psykers in range. And a couple of the individual creeds have particular interest for him. Prophets of Flesh can get the Vexator Mask for another Fight's Last ability, always nice to have. And the Dark Creed can make their spooky scary homunculus. A 9-inch aura of spooky enemy units that are trying to do objectives. You roll 3d6 versus their leadership, and if they fail then they lose Obsec and their actions. Losing Obsec is quite painful, particularly when Drukhari have so much fast moving chaff. Perhaps one of the units that are looking really quite interesting now though are Grotesques. They went down from 40 points to 35, and previously tended to be taken as damage dealers really quite rarely compared with the other things on offer. For 35 points, say the same price as a Space Marine Blade Guard veteran, you've got 5 attacks at Strength 5, AP -2 and Damage 2, and still moving up the board pretty much equally quickly with a lot of other units, 7-inch movement and advance and charge from Power from Pain. That's really quite a hefty amount of general purpose attacks, and you do have the potential for re-rolling wound rolls with them if you need to fight some hard targets for 2 CP. I think their durability might also be in the level where it's now considered quite good. 4 wounds at T5 with their invul save, and then their 5+ wound shrug off from insensible to pain. I think perhaps the most interesting coven for them though is the -1 damage custom coven, the Artist of Flesh one. -1 damage coupled with that feel no pain and good toughness really is quite a lot of barriers to get through, and these guys could easily be laughing off some very high damage attacks if they do roll well. Finally, they can each take a liquefier gun if you want instead of their cleaver. Since Dark Technomancer's got nerfed, I don't think that that's going to be quite as good. The Flesh Gauntlet is just nowhere near as good of a combat weapon. In any case, I just really wouldn't be too surprised to see a whole bunch of these lumbering their way up the board or jumping out of raiders. The third Coven unit that got the buff was the Talos that drops down to 100 points from 110. Again, one of those units that I think just needs to have its points cost right, and I did feel it was a touch on the expensive side, at least compared with the many other great Drukhari options. I think Talos are a unit that people are going to experiment with as well. They've got a decent variety of customizable melee weapon options, an 8-inch movement and fly to deliver them into battle, and could perhaps make good use of never stationary to zoom them up the board, hopefully weather a turn of shooting, and if the opponent can't bring them down then charge something key. Again, when they get in melee they have plenty of general purpose melee damage output, and for 2 CP you can re-roll wound rolls. They've then got a bit of shooting as well, whether it's heat lances, liquefier guns, or the other options, and their toughness is really quite impressive as well. Their toughness 6, 7 wounds, a 3+ save and a 5+ feel no pain, and again the -1 damage from that Coven Obsession could really put them over the edge durability wise, and allow them to laugh off a lot of incoming fire. It's going to take 7 or so las cannon hits to bring one of these down, which really isn't too bad when it's only something like 8 or 9 to bring down an average Space Marine Redemptor Dreadnought. Finally, they do seem like a good unit for homunculi to buff. +1 toughness will be nice, plus their repairs, and they do have the potential to be resurrected from the dead from things like Kronos if you can manage to make the stars align, and that could be bringing back a seriously powerful model to the table. Finally, for the actual buffed units, there's a trio of vehicles that all went down 10 points. The Ravager, the Razor Wing Jet Fighter, and the Void Raven Bomber. For me, the one that I found most interesting was the Ravager going down, as to be honest I already thought it was a very reasonable gun platform for the points, nice and fast, and putting out some nice damage D3+3 shots with those Dark Lances. They really like being Cabal of the Black Heart or Obsidian Rose, and 2 or 3 of them seems like they could be a very easy fire support choice, flitting around the back of the Drukhari army. I do kind of feel it's a bit weird though that Raiders have to pay an extra 5 points for their Dark Lances over the Disintegrators, and Ravagers have to pay an extra 5 points for their Disintegrators over the Dark Lances. A bit of a weird case of Games Workshop not really knowing which gun is better. I kind of feel like they probably should just be the same price. I feel like particularly as Trueborn cost a little bit more as well, they might get a bit more of a look in. They just seem like a nice enough fire support platform for me, and they were already seeing some use at 140 points. The Flyers are certainly a touch more interesting as well, going down 10. The Razor Wing kind of feels very similar to the amount of firepower that you get on the Ravager, but just paying the 20-point premium for the ridiculously fast movement that you get on Flyers and the -1 to hit all the time. definitely could well be worth the price. Getting shots on things that are hiding out of line of sight in the enemy drop zone is really cool, though you're very unlikely to be able to hide the flyer behind terrain at all, so it often means that your opponent could get the first strike. I think I still perhaps prefer the Ravager myself, but I can see why people might go for the Razor Wing. Finally, the Void Raven kind of feels like a Razor Wing that's just got the Void Mine strapped to it, and to be honest, for the extra 25 points, it seems like a pretty reasonable upgrade if you want that. If you can find a good place to drop it, and you can infect multiple units, it certainly has the potential to be absolutely game-changing. A decent chance to deal D6 mortal wounds to a bunch of units is really cool, most certainly a unit with the potential to strike terror into the enemy. Finally, here's just a trio of units that I think that we'll be seeing far more in Drukhari army lists, not affected by the points changes at all, but perhaps some of the stronger units that we're already seeing a fair bit of play, and weakening the other options just makes them so much more attractive. Racks at 8 points are decent cheap objective holders, reasonably fast and tough, and can do a touch of damage in melee, or can have some interesting roles with Dark Technomancers and some of their upgrades, particularly with Covens in general looking so much better than they were. They might see a bit more play than before. I think Hellions at 17 points feel like a unit that Games Workshop very easily could have nerfed with all the rest, and I'm surprised they didn't get a similar treatment to the Incubi, maybe going up something like to 18 or 19. They're enormously fast, have brutal melee, reasonable toughness, and good stratagems. I'd expect to see even more of them on the table now. And finally we have the Court of the Archon, again some pretty reasonable close range or melee damage, and really putting quite a lot of wounds on the table with a 5+ feel no pain. They can be quite good for objective holders, jumping out of transports, or just acting as bodyguards for the Archon as they might be intended. A few units of these just for utility seems pretty handy. So overall, I do think that the Drukhari have been decently reined in by this FAQ. I think they will be winning a few less games because of this, but a lot of their other units do seem to have got even more scary than before, and I feel like we're going to be seeing more Grotesques, Telos and Ravagers on the board, and perhaps a better internally balanced codex for Drukhari even than previously, when already most of their units were very usable indeed. So as always, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think the changes, the buffs and nerfs were good or bad, and did they go far enough? As always, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this, and try and keep 40k content coming just about every day. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel and keep these videos coming, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.